Greece has agreed to take its medicine, and it's got a bitter taste indeed. Banks to reopen next Monday, probably, but you've got a weakened prime minister who's had to cross the aisle to pass painful reforms that will again penalize ordinary citizens. It's not just the Greeks, though, who have a problem. Now that Athens has held up its end of the bargain, the EU has to cough up the cash for both a third bailout and a bridging loan, feuding at a weekend summit, the likes of which Europe never saw during the financial crisis in 2008, lays bare what many see as a growing north-south rift over Greece and over money more generally, a rift which still has the Germans grumbling that a temporary exclusion of Greece from the euro would have been better all around. No way, say the French. They, but also the IMF and the United States, want a deal to once and for all lighten Greece's Kafkaesque debt burden. The International Monetary Fund's in a particularly tight spot over this one, breaking some of its own rules when it stepped in to help back in 2010. And if tiny Greece can rock Europe and the IMF to the core, what does it all say about the euro? What does it all say about the EU and the political winds that are blowing these days? Today in the France 24 debate, Till Debt Do Us Part, with us from Mannheim, Germany, Clemens Fuest from the Center for European Economic Research. He was an advisor to the finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble. Many thanks for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Good evening. Thanks for the invitation. I'm pleased to be here.
Also joining us, Yves Bertoncini, the director of the Jacques Delors Institute, a think tank that looks squarely at European issues. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Good afternoon.
Christian Etienne, a professor at the prestigious political science institute Sciences Po, CERI, which is your research wing.
Right. Good evening.
Of Sciences Po. And joining us from Castiglione e Chiavaresi in Italy, Yasha Monk. He's a political science lecturer at Harvard University. And you have just penned a piece in Die Zeit where you announced that you've resigned your membership of the German Social Democratic Party. We'll be talking about that in just a short moment. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me on, Francois.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Let's begin with you, Yasha Monk. This announcement that you're leaving the Social Democrats, which are in a grand coalition right now with Angela Merkel's CDU party.
Yeah, I've been a member of the SPD since the age of 13. You actually have to be 14 to join, and I was so keen to join. I identified so much of the history of the Social Democratic Party in Germany, which is a deeply noble history, that I, badgered the comrades in Munich and said, look, can't they somehow join? And in the end, they relented and they said, look, just pretend to make a mistake. Say you were born in 1981 rather than 1982, and that way you can join up. And I've been a proud member of a party, but in the last years, I've had more and more difficulty with some of the directions it's taken, and some of that has to do with issues beyond Greece. I think that the SPD has not stood up for the rights of migrants, especially at the moment when there's a horrible migrant crisis happening in Europe that we tend to forget. I think the SPD has not stood up for liberal issues, like forcing a real debate about same-sex marriage in Germany, even as the United States and Ireland and other countries have legalized it. They have, to my mind, taken a very soft stance on Russia, with former chancellors like Gerhard Schröder and Helmut Schmidt soft paddling the threat and the violation of rights that Russia has perpetrated. But for me, the last step, the thing that made it unconscionable to stay in the SPD, has been its behavior over the last weeks and months. What we're seeing at the moment in Europe is not just a question about the Greek economy. It's not a technical question about debt. It's not a question about whether hotels in some islands should pay, X amount of VAT or X minus one amount of VAT. This is a question about the future of Europe. This is a question we are engaged in at the moment about whether the idea of a closer Europe has any kind of future. And I think that in the kind of way in which the SPD has aided and abetted the moralistic tone that the Germans have taken in Greece, the technocratic tone not thinking about what kind of long-term future we can have and build together in Europe, but just thinking about these very short-term issues and then coming to a deal that doesn't make sense for anybody, is really, to me, destroying what Europe stands for.
But Yascha Mounk, you will agree that the Vice-Chancellor of Germany, Sigmar Gabriel, is siding with public opinion when he toes a tough line when it comes to Greece.
Yes, I agree that he's following public opinion. But the problem of the SPD and the problem of a lot of the left-wing media in Germany has been that for 5 years they have simply followed public opinion instead of trying to shape it. What is astounding to me is that there's a consensus among the serious economists internationally that austerity politics in the middle of a crisis is not a solution, that the debt of Greece is unsustainable, as even the IMF has admitted in the last days. And nevertheless, what German public opinion thinks is to frame the whole issue in a moralistic way. Do we owe anything to the Greeks? Have the Greeks done enough to atone for the financial sins? And when you ask a question that way, you just come to answers that make no sense. I agree that Greece has to reform. I'm personally not a fan of the Syriza government in any way, shape or form. But at the moment, what the German government is pursuing is a deal that won't ever help Deutsche Bank or German taxpayers get a dollar back, because the Greek debt is unsustainable, as the IMF has said, and nor will it help give any kind of promise of a real future to Greece. So why are we doing this? Why can't we try and stand up for a solution that makes sense for somebody, for anybody? Because the deal that we're pursuing at the moment truly does not help anybody in Europe.
All right, we've heard this Thursday from one man, and that is the German finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, who was interviewed on the radio in Germany a little earlier in the day. And for the second time this week, he seemed to be regretting still that Greece was not taken out of the Eurozone temporarily at that weekend summit in Brussels.
We never said we had to impose the Grexit. We can't do that, and we don't want to. No one proposed it. But it may be the best path for Greece to follow. Many people are suggesting it, even in Greece, more and more.
Clemens Fest, is he right to make these kinds of statements on the eve of a vote in the Bundestag?
I think he's right, and I think it makes sense to that either the euro or Europe will fail if Greece leaves the eurozone temporarily or permanently. We have in the EU, we have countries inside and outside the eurozone. Greece is in a very serious economic situation. I agree that the program that has been agreed last week and doesn't make the slightest bit of sense. The Greeks have rejected the much less intrusive program in their referendum. The Prime Minister, Alexis Tsipras, has said he doesn't support the program. They vote for it. He recommends voting for it because they are afraid that their banks may be shut down very quickly. So this doesn't make any sense, and that's why I think Schäuble is completely right. We should openly discuss the implications of a Brexit, and
so are you saying that? Are you saying, Clemens Fest? Are you saying that lawmakers should vote no tomorrow to this bailout package?
I would recommend to the Bundestag to vote no. Yes, not with the objective of having Greek banks collapse 2 days later. Not at all. We need some kind of plan B. And I think, in the current situation, the better plan would be agreeing on some kind of coordinated Brexit, having Greece stay in the EU but leave the currency union. I think that would be the much better approach. Of course, that requires the Greek government to agree. If they prefer to go for this program, which I agree won't work, there is little anyone can do. But I think they shouldn't.
Yves Bertoncini, are we kicking the can down the road with this latest agreement that was reached over the weekend in Brussels?
Well, it was probably the worst deal, except all the others. It's precisely what Alexis Tsipras told his people yesterday in his parliament. There were other options, including a temporary Grexit, which would have been a permanent one. Let's be serious. It would have been a permanent Grexit. Clearly, the option is not on the table any longer. So I'm quite surprised to hear Mr. Schäuble not respecting a decision made at the highest level, not respecting his chancellor. It's clear. Now, the Grexit is no longer an option on the short run. I'm also quite surprised to listen to someone saying that the Greek people should behave this way or the other way. If the Greek people, and a very vast majority of the Greek people, more than 70% of the Greek people, agree on the fact that even if this new memorandum of understanding is very harsh for them, they want to try and implement it because they want to stay within the monetary union. It's a democratic choice. I mean, it's not an option to believe that
today. But the point of Clemens Forest is that it's not money well spent, and that it ultimately won't help the Greeks either. This plan.
The design of the program is questionable. Yes, indeed, it is. But now we have a plan. It is still a countdown, but it's a reverse countdown. Last week, the countdown possible outcome could have been the Grexit. Today, we are in a different countdown because the horizon is to keep Greece, a deeply reformed Greece, within the monetary union. And of course, to this end, there are many obstacles, many hurdles. Some have been met already. Yesterday in Athens, today with the bridge financing accepted in Brussels. There are so many others. But please, let's try and do what has been decided by the highest authorities, meaning the heads of states and government in Brussels last weekend.
All right, that brings us again, Yves Bertoncini is right to the news of today. Money on the way from Brussels in the forms of a bridging loan, from Frankfurt, money for the banks, the Eurozone dipping into its rainy day fund to the tune of 7 billion euros. The banks in Greece could be reopened soon. Not soon enough, though, for businesses and ordinary citizens crippled at the close of a third week without cash. They, too, again, are bitter about this bailout deal.
We are all waiting for things to stabilize in Greece, nothing more. We are all waiting for things to stabilize.
We will suffer. We lost a battle. We lost it. Exactly the same way as it happened in the Second World War, except in the end Germany lost the war.
Let us all kneel and bow to the European Central Bank. Mercy. What must we do? The people must stand up. How long will this continue?
All right, a bit of irony there, Christian Lekend. Some people angry with the European Central Bank, others angry with the Germans. What do you think of the tone of all of this?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Yves is right when he said that a decision has been taken by the European Council and that it has been respected. It has to be respected. Well, this is now where we are, where we stand. And I'm very much in favor of giving a new chance to the Greek government and to the Greek society. The problem is I'm not sure that the conditions which have been put are realistic. So when Mr. Schäuble is talking about a Grexit, probably in political terms, it's not very wise to do it now. But this is not an option that we have totally to put out of the agenda. If Tsipras is not able to do the reforms, which means a huge mobilization of the state, a huge mobilization of the society to change the political systems, to change the habits which are there in Greece for decades and decades. In this case, a Grexit could be an option, but probably we don't have to talk politically about that now because we have to let the Greek implement now what they accepted, even if Mr. Tsipras accepted without a great condition. Well, a great conviction. You know, this is what he said in the interviews.
Clemens Forest, do you think the Greeks this time will come through? That after 2 weeks of seeing their banks closed, they will be following through with these painful reforms?
Look, I think Greece, politicians as well as the population are in a stress situation. And that, given that it is, very difficult to make any predictions. And the priority, I agree, is, to ease the situation, to help them. But let's face it, in terms of hard information, we have a referendum which was against reforms. It was said not to be against Euro membership, but it was a 60% referendum against reforms. What we now have is some opinion polls saying that the Greeks support the reform program. But this is opinion polls. Tsipras himself has said he doesn't like the program. He doesn't support it. And that means there is no ownership in Greece of these reforms. And we know from development economics and from other cases that if there is no domestic ownership of reforms, they won't work. This particular reform program is not just very ambitious and has no ownership. It includes tax increases and a massive burden on the Greek economy, which will deepen the downturn. I doubt that this is the way to go.
Yasha Monk, do you agree?
Yes, I do, actually, because we have to think not only of a long-term economic fallout from this, but also of a long-term political fallout from this. So let's take a step back. Before 2008, two parties shared the lion's share of the Greek vote, up to 80%, PASOK and New Democracy. Because of the policy that was imposed on Greece, these parties have rapidly lost support. PASOK is now in single digits. It may fall further in current opinion polls. And so what came about? A party like Syriza that in some ways tried to deal with a real political mess that the old parties left, and in some ways had deep problems of its own that also contributed to the situation we're now in. Well, what's going to happen? What do we think? After Syriza promised the Greeks dignity, after Syriza promised the Greeks a referendum in which they could vote no to particular terms, and now they are stuck having to implement even tougher, even more punitive, one might even want to say even more sadistic terms. Do you think Syriza is going to win the next elections? I doubt it. So who's going to be left? All of the establishment political parties and the center and the populist left parties have now been consumed by this political process. Let's hope that there's some new force that found itself miraculously to pick up the pieces when Greece goes to new elections, which will happen sooner rather than later. But I'm very afraid of a political fallout of this crisis. And that's true at the wider political level in the EU as well. What's the real situation? Let's get away from the exact amount of debt and the exact short-term economic fallout that is going on at the moment. It's serious and worrying for what it is. Here's how I see the situation in the European Union at the moment. I think actually in some ways people like the status quo in Europe insofar as we're talking about freedom of movement in goods, Erasmus, being able to retire in other European countries, those kinds of things. But because of the introduction of the euro, that is a status quo that's no longer really on the table. We have an economic unity without a currency union, without a political union, and that is not sustainable. We either have to take a big step forward, but evidently at the moment nobody really is in the mood to take, or we have to find a way of taking a big step backward that everybody is scared of. But one way or the other, what worries me most about the deal and what worries me most about the complete lack of leadership of Angela Merkel over the last 5 years, but it has been aided and abetted by her junior coalition partner at every turn, is the unwillingness to get us out of this situation. We like the status quo in some ways, but that status quo is no longer on the table. And if we somehow persist with it by making deals no matter how bad, making deals no matter how short-termist, then 15, 20 years from now, another huge economic crisis will hit us and we'll start right where we started back in 2008. And that's what's most worrying to me in this political situation.
Yves Bertoncini?
I think the deal made in Brussels is even not a second best. It may be a first best, third best. But what I see is that the most radical in the two camps have been defeated. Mr. Varoufakis in Greece, he was fired. And he explained why, because he was in favor of a kind of temporary Brexit as well. And I think on the other side, yes, maybe Mr. Schäuble, even if he's very subtle, has been defeated. That's why it's kind of balanced deal, even if...
You say he's been defeated, but he's more popular right now, according to surveys, than the Chancellor herself. And our correspondent was telling us earlier that when they caucus, the CDU party, there are more defections there for this proposal than within the SPD.
Yes, but you could also say that Mr. Varoufakis is a star in Greece, but is not in power any longer. So we have reached a deal. What is striking to me is that yesterday evening in Athens, there were more than 70% of the member of parliament, of the Vouli, who voted for the deal, very imperfect deal. I have absolutely no doubt that in the Bundestag there will be a massive vote for this deal, with the defection of extremists, or I don't want to say extremists, but I mean radical people from the CDU, CSU. They won't vote this deal. But at the end of the day, we'll have a massive vote at the Bundestag.
Right, so when we come back, because we're going to have to take a quick break, we'll be looking at the scars all this is going to leave for Europe. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.